Oh, hello, students. Okay, so for this exam, really all that I'm asking you guys to do is to watch this video. And it's just going over some concepts that Summer had noticed, and I had noticed that you guys might be struggling with, just so that you get a refresher on some of these and feel more comfortable with them. So for Chapter 9, the social construction of gender, really, that's saying that our society and how we define gender roles, so what we see as the expectations for women, expectations for men, that everyone should fit into those very narrow roles, and that the thought that there would be women who would prefer some of the roles that men play, and that there are men that might prefer to take on some of the roles that women have traditionally taken. It's really saying that society has decided how we're supposed to behave, and either we behave that way and live with very little controversy around gender, or if we live outside of our gender roles, that there are pressures and discrimination that comes with that. But that the idea that there's a natural way that women are supposed to be and a natural way that men are supposed to be, or that there's really just two genders, male and female, in reality there's so many different ways to express gender, that in itself, that there are just two kinds of people, is a social construction. So naturally, actually, there's probably quite a continuum between people, and the way that we define gender is really narrow and not necessarily very helpful. That if we looked at gender differently, it might eliminate certain discriminations, if that makes sense. Okay, so Chapter 10, midlife crisis, sort of the idea of midlife crisis, it is out there that midlife, after children have left the home, if families have children, that this causes some upset, or at this point in life people start to question, did I do what I wanted to accomplish up until this point in life? Because at midlife, then you have some years to try to accomplish those things if they're important. So it's really a time of rechecking, or sort of checking in on oneself. That has also been very socially constructed, right? This idea that men in middle age get upset about, did I do what I wanted to in my work life? And then with women, it's, oh, I'm no longer a mother. That's how I completely defined myself, right? Well, obviously the world has changed quite a bit around that, and men and women, when they sort of check in on their life at this point in our culture, it might cause a crisis. But I think that was more the case when people were pushed into very rigid gender roles, right? So I think that has a lot to do with gender expression, which the book doesn't talk much about. Then in Chapter 11, Erikson, developmental theory, talking about the young adult's sort of main task is to find a relationship, a fruitful relationship, a long-term relationship, in regards to being isolated. Again, this is, again, at the time that Erikson was doing this work, gender roles were very, very rigid, I think, and definitions of family were very rigid. So really, it's just making sure you have relationships that make you happy. You could be single and still have friendships that are fulfilling. Excuse me. You just, it's just not isolating yourself from the world. Obviously, social separation, the extreme social separation, has psychological impact, and that can be at any age. But this is a time where people tend to couple up, tend to decide to create social networks to help support the work that they're doing, the stressful jobs, the stressful life of adulthood. The middle adult stages are generativity versus stagnation. And really this is just feeling like you're accomplishing what you need to support yourself, your family, and be independent, because at least in the U.S. culture, independence is valued a great deal. So it's people that are able to be independent and take on adult roles or traditional adult roles. And stagnation being more folks that are struggling with that, being independent. Peck's theory is also in this chapter, and he talks a lot about just moving from thinking of relationships as sexualized to just social value, that wisdom's more important than physical power, that emotional flexibility is more important, or what we're wanting to move towards, as opposed to really having a lack of emotional range, which you think more of as early on. Some of what helps us develop more of an emotional range is just living life and experiencing different emotions. And then just mental flexibility, realizing that not everything is so black and white, that the world is sort of gray, and people that tend to be more rigid and think that everything is very clear, what is right and wrong is very clear, tend to have a harder time as they age. This chapter also talks about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the pyramids, and the bottom being just surviving, right? So the idea is that once you're able to have supports, love, food, shelter, all of those things aren't stuff that you need to worry about, that you actually have time to consider how you can best contribute to society and to other people. So that sort of self-actualization, where you are able to think about how you can contribute to the larger picture, and you're very aware of other people's suffering, and you want to do good for others, because in the end it makes your quality of life better too, right? This chapter also had Glasser's choice theory, Glasser's choice theory, and this is all about how thoughts influence emotions, actions, and physical functioning. So cognitive theory, the idea that a lot of what causes us problems is our thoughts, but also attitude, or our thoughts about the world, can really help our health, our psychology, and our success. So this idea of having a positive attitude, or seeing strengths in yourself and in others, how that really helps you. Whereas the opposite, if you have low self-esteem, you're very bitter and angry about the world, that this can have an impact on your health and really influence your actions, right? Okay, and then Gawaine's theory of development, mostly learning to trust your intuition. Intuition really, on some level comes from experience, and realizing that trusting those sort of connections that you've made over time, and trusting your emotional intelligence, particularly in spaces where there's not a clear answer, right? Okay, chapter 12, the protective factors of marital happiness. Really, it's where couples have share in the responsibilities, share power within the household, good communication, affection, compatibility in interest and in attraction, the support of others of that relationship. All of those things are protective factors. And that chapter 2, there was some concern over not understanding empty shell marriages. So that's sort of marriages of convenience. This happens a lot, actually, in our society. Marriage is sort of a way to survive economically. So you will see people that either believe that marriage is important, or the expectations of their family or their religion is to be married, so they are married, but not necessarily feel a connection to the person they're married to. Or they have financial obligations, just economically more sound in our current economy and our current sort of life to be financially linked to someone. So they're in marriages for reasons that have really nothing to do with connection or affection. Okay. And then income disparity. This chapter talks about income disparity, the importance of that. The United States has huge income disparity. So very few people make a lot of money. And the difference between the people that make the most money and most of the middle class is really huge. And this has health consequences. So in countries that have less income disparity, they see generally people are more happy, people's health are better, because there's less injustice around income. So the U.S. is one of the worst when it comes to that. So this also sort of plays a part in the difference between men and women and the incomes that they have. Certain jobs are given more value than other jobs. It's not really based on work or knowledge or any of those things. It's based on sort of the type of work that's being done. And so work that typically was men-oriented more towards than women, those salaries are higher. So there's a lot of questioning of valuing particular kinds of work than others, particularly when it seems gendered. So this chapter talks about income disparities between men and women, but the larger economic disparity between those that have and those that don't have. And really, there's a huge gap between the wealthiest people and the middle class. There's not as big of a divide between the poor and the middle class. And really, everything's sort of getting squished down, and fewer people making all the money and less people making less money. So that over time, salaries have stayed sort of stagnant, particularly since the 70s. There's been no real increase in middle class salaries. So everybody, middle class and below, is sort of stayed here, whereas the wealthy have gotten wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. So their chart's gone like this, right? However, productivity is increased, so we're working harder for less money, and so that's a lot of stress. When all that work stress is on this group of people, and all the economic gain is up here, you can see how that can cause some real problems. Okay. Chapter 13. Some concern or misunderstanding around Kinsey's 6-point scale. So Kinsey really did some very in-depth research, talked to people about what they were attracted to, who they were attracted to, I mean, he was one of the first sexologists, so really asking people very intimate questions about their sex life. And he wrote 2 different books with his group of researchers about men and women. But what he found is that there was really a continuum of sexuality, that homosexuality was on one extreme and heterosexuality was on another extreme. And then in actuality, there were lots of different attractions in between. So people that consider themselves heterosexual don't all have the same level of aversion to same-sex people. So, and in reality, so if we were to ask people, like, over their lifetime who they've been attracted to or who they've loved, that it's actually very rare that people are just solely attracted to people that are the opposite sex and solely attracted to people that are the same sex. So in reality, the majority of us are somewhere in between those 2 extremes. Primary attraction, that's the group that most people are, if they were to write down how many people they were attracted to, strongly attracted to in their life, that the group that comes up the most for a person would be their primary attraction, right? So, again, we've already talked about gender being a social construction. So there are people that don't even fit that idea of male-female. So it's very complicated because some people are just attracted to people regardless of gender, and other people are attracted to particular temperaments, particular physicalities of different gender expressions. So he really, I mean, this was fairly early on too for this kind of conversation. So Kinsey's still looked at as very progressive. I mean, even now his theories are considered progressive. And it's why we still talk about him. So hopefully that makes more sense. Chapter 14, Cellular Theories of Aging. This is that, they're not quite sure, but what the theory is that our cells, over time, they're accumulating materials, substances that are harmful to our bodies. And so the older you get, the more you collect these substances and your cells die, and the more your cells die, the more you age, right? You wrinkle, get gray hair, things like that. So that's the cellular theory. Centenarians are anyone that's 100 plus, right? So the sort of groups around the world, when they look around the world, there are certain areas that have more people over 100 than others. And they think that that's due to the lifestyle of those cultures, the diet, that they've had to, for just survival reasons, had to stay active, that their cultures also are stimulating in terms of intellect, creativity. So they look at, much like genetic scientists look at twins a lot, people that are studying aging look at people over 100 to get a sense of, well, why have you lived so long? And some of it's genetics too. So yeah, so that's what the chapter is talking about in terms of centenarians. Okay, chapter 15. Westberg's model and Kubler-Ross model, both of those are grieving models, or learning that you're going to die and sort of what you do. Both are stages theories. Westberg is adding on to Kubler-Ross's model, and Kubler-Ross is sort of seen as the queen of death theory. I mean, she's more likely to be on any kind of licensure exam that you have. She's been refuted completely, so has Westberg, that really people don't grieve in stages, that it's actually all over the place. So they might, but just so you know, Kubler-Ross's stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So 5. denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So when they first hear that they have a prognosis that's not very long, they deny it, right? It's in our nature to deny that. And so this is true of other kinds of grief too, not just around death and dying. That could be that someone's being told they're disabled, or someone that they love is about to die, or kids in a divorce. So it applies to more than just dying. So denying that it's going to happen, then being angry. Angry, why me? Why is this happening to me, right? This bargaining, I'll be really good if you just let me live longer, right? I don't want to die. And then the depression that comes, the sadness that comes with the beginnings of accepting that you're going to die. And then the last is acceptance. So Westberg's model just adds some things to that, that before anger, there's just sort of this emotional eruption between denial and anger, with crying and yelling and just what I think of as anger, but it's a more expressive. So there's an expressive part, and then it might be more internalized, depending on the person. Then illness often happens after the anger stage. It's a lot of emotional energy, just like any crisis. The beginning is the hardest part. You feel panicked, you feel like you can't make any decisions, it's just hard to breathe kind of thing. And that really has an impact on your immune system. So people tend to get sick. So then the sick part, then they might have a cold that's the result of all the stress, and then that gives them this sense of panic, like, oh, this is what it's going to be like. Like, here's where the sickness happens, and I'm just going to remain sick. Also, guilt comes, according to him, comes after this, where you start to think, well, what if I had done something differently? Well, what if I, hadn't smoked cigarettes? Or what if I hadn't stayed in a relationship where I was getting hurt? Those kinds of things. And then the depression, much like Kubler-Ross talks about. And then beginning to try to get your life back together. So after the crisis and after the sadness, it's deciding, okay, sort of coming to homeostasis again. Like, okay, I don't want to live in this panicked, sort of sad state. I want to have a decent last part of my life, right? So this sort of re-entry, or that into deciding I'm going to try to live life as best I can. Having some hope that, it's not going to be so bad, that I get a chance to spend time with my family and do some things I've always wanted to do. And then the last thing is affirming that, okay, this is my new reality. I've decided to face this new reality a certain way. And that's really where palliative care comes in. Palliative care tries to help people get past the panic piece to then thinking about, well, how do I, if I only have 3 months, how do I want to spend those 3 months? Not panicked and not crying. Most people don't want to do that. So that's that. And then chapter 16, you guys, there was some concerns over not understanding the senior citizen centers. So there's federal monies allotted for senior services around the country, and so most cities and most places have a senior center, senior nutrition, some way to make sure people aren't going to nursing homes unless they really need to go to nursing homes. Here in Toledo, the Area Office on Aging helps to facilitate all of these services, and there are senior centers throughout Toledo. And it's just a place where people can come hang out with other people their age, get a meal, maybe take classes. Some of them are very elaborate in what they do, and others it's just, they play games and just have a communal meal. But there are also places where there are lots of social work job possibility. So if you move around anywhere, going through an area office on aging, there's quite a lot of case management services and things available to people. And then grief counseling. Grief counseling can be done in lots of different ways. There are support groups for people who are grieving the loss of somebody. And then there are people that counsel people through sort of normal grief, help educate them about how grief works, how it's not the same for everybody, that it takes quite a while to feel like you're adjusting and that that's okay. And having a place where you can talk about loss, because families don't tend to be very good about listening to people who have lost someone that they love. It's sad and they don't want to talk about it. So people feel like they can't express their sorrow. So grief counselors are very helpful in at least being a listening ear to that. Some people have complicated grief. They're just never come out of the sort of panic, sadness. And so there's lots of things that grief counselors help people do, like giving back to the community, recognizing that person on a larger scale. Sometimes that really helps people to have something other than just interpersonal counseling, but actually, I want to not have this happen for other families, so I'm going to spend time, raising money for the Alzheimer's Association, or creating a scholarship for kids who have had a sibling die, so those things. Also, grief counselors are very helpful in looking at sort of macro things that can be done to help a person grieve and move on. Because sometimes for some people it's just really difficult. And they don't have a lot of the protective factors around them to, move to feeling more. It's just hard to function day to day. And they don't ever get back to that, so they really need intervention to help them do that. Okay, so those are all the concepts that folks were having trouble with this semester. So really, for the final, I just want you guys to say, "Yeah, Heather, I watched the whole thing." And if you guys have any questions, if I didn't make any sense, just letting me know what you still need clarification on. So saying, I need clarification on this, or I'm good, I get it, I want one or the other responses in the final exam spot on the discussion board. Okay, you guys have been great. I've really enjoyed the class, and reading the papers particularly were really well done. The majority of them were really well thought out, and I think you guys are getting the theories and stuff. So, thank you so much for a great semester.